All right, good morning, everybody. See if this, okay, this is working, and that is up. Okay, so this will be a continuation of last time. There were some things that I wanted to go through first. First thing, got an email that I'll read. It's from, you guys should have gotten the same email or something very similar to it. That talks about the AP exam dates for 2020 and how that's going to operate. So I'll read the email. There's a presentation that should be in the link. Go to that and it'll explain that. Exams are given from May 11th to the 22nd. Makeup testing will be available for each subject from June 1st to the 5th. Students may take exams at home or in schools if they're reopened. We are not going to be reopened. Each subject exam will be on the same day at the same time worldwide. So I'll pull up and then it says click here for the testing schedule, which I'll pull up. We encourage you to remind your students about exam dates for their courses, which I'll do in a second. So exam format. Most exams will have 1 or 2 free response questions, and each question will be timed separately. Students will need to write and submit their responses within the allotted time for each question. This is where it becomes super important that if you know that there's someone who's not watching these videos, and you know that there's someone who doesn't check their emails, but they are taking the AP exam, this is where it's important to message them and just be like, hey, you need to watch like the first 10 minutes. Students will be able to take the exam on any device they have access to, computer, tablet, or smartphone. They'll be able to type and upload their responses or write responses by hand and submit a photo via their cell phones. What that means is if you don't want to type on a cell phone and you don't have a computer, you can use your cell phone to see the question, handwrite it, take a picture, and submit it. This is the important part right here. For most exams, the exams will be 45 minutes long, plus an additional 5 minutes for uploading, and students will need to access the online testing system 30 minutes early to get set up. What that means is that when you go in there, let's say, or I have the exam time. So hypothetical, your exam starts at 2. That means you will need to be in there at 1:50 to make sure that everything works. You will get your question at 2. At 2:45, you're done, and you have 5 minutes to upload it, which means if you are running on like an iPhone 2 or you have a really poor data connection, you need to make sure that you get to that early. Or try to go over to a friend's house or something like that to get access to Wi-Fi or something similar to that. Certain courses will use portfolios. That is not what we're doing, but we do have computer science. So those, it'll be submitted separately. Your teacher will let you know about that. And then it talks about world languages. There are a handful of students that don't have access to cell phones, laptops, internet, things like that. If you don't, there is a link that you can follow in your email, and they will work that out. I don't know what it is, but follow that link, and they will, and they'll help out. Yes, you need to be in there 30 minutes early for all the AP tests. I'm not really sure. I would be in there 30 minutes before for each of them. Looking at the exam schedule, there's 2 hours between each of the exams that are back to back. So given the 45 minutes and then 5 minutes to submit, I think that gives you plenty of time. Exam scores and credit, special benefits for teachers, exam security. Okay, here's a big one. So this was something that I didn't know what they were going to do, and now we kind of have an answer. Like many college level exams, this AP exam will be open book or open note. Whenever I say I have an open book or open note exam, if you have to look in the book and try to find the answer, then you're not going to do well on the test. That means it's going to be information that's derived from outside of what's in the book. The exam format questions are designed specifically for an at-home administration, so points will not be earned from context that can be found in the textbooks or online, which means they're looking for application of things that are in the book. However, students taking the exams may not consult with any other individuals during the testing period. Will take necessary steps to protect the integrity of each exam administered. as we do every year. We're confident that a vast majority of the AP students will follow the rules for taking the exams. A small number of the students who may try to gain an unfair advantage. We have a comprehensive and strict set of protocols in place to prevent and detect cheating. While some of these practices are confidential to maximize their effectiveness, students and education professionals can learn more about the security measures, which I'll pull up. At a minimum, test takers should understand that those attempting to gain an unfair advantage will either be blocked from testing or their AP scores will be canceled and their high school will be notified, as will colleges and other organizations to which the student has already sent any college exams to, including SAT scores. And they may be prohibited from taking future AP exams as well as SAT subject tests, or CLEP exams. And then it talks about remote testing and then professional development for teachers. Basically, this is just, I'm going to close this. That got annoying yesterday. It's just a fancy way of saying don't cheat on it. Pulling up the window. Here is the times are at the top. So we are in Eastern time. So make sure that you're actually paying attention to what Eastern time is. And then I know some of you are in physics, some are in government, calculus, chemistry, bio, and environmental science is right here. We're on Monday, May 18th, and you're taking your exam at 4 p.m. Eastern time. All right. So make sure that at 3:30 that you are trying to log in to the environmental science page in order to get that so that you're in your exam, you're taking your and all that stuff. This is, I mean, you can see the website up at the top, but go to this website. It's on College Board, AP Central. You will have access, or you should have access to this. It's no secret when your exam is. So make sure that you are, you know what time you're taking the exam. And then in regards to cheating, here is the thing for it. They're using tools to detect plagiarism. I've used these tools before, and they are pretty good, but they're not without faults. Now, don't worry, because if I ask you what is the most abundant molecule in the atmosphere, there's only so many ways that you can say it's nitrogen. And that's not what it's looking for. It's looking for log segments that are extremely similar. And what it does is it gives you a plagiarism percentage. So if I put in what is the most common element in the atmosphere, and you type in it's nitrogen, there's going to be other people that type that in. I assume it's going to be through AP Central. Keep an eye on your email, whichever one you registered with AP Central. I would keep an eye on that to whether you're going to access it through here or if they'll give you a separate link beforehand, because I am not entirely sure about that. So basically with this, what this is saying is don't cheat. I understand that some of you are going to take this exam as a group or with a friend. If that happens, then make sure that you're typing in your own responses and it's just not one person typing everything in and then copy and pasting it. You should be able to take this exam by yourself. Again, your friends aren't going to be going to your university specifically and sitting next to you in your classes and taking your tests. So you should try to take everything separate. So we'll go through the PowerPoint. We're going to finish up the PowerPoint today. This one's it. I didn't want to spend too much time on that because, excuse me, you have access to the same, or you should have access to the same information I do. There is a, I will inform you guys as I get information. Again, we still have a month until the test. I'm sure more information will start to come out. Oh, another thing I wanted to mention. No, I didn't want to do that. Pull up a separate browser so I can go to it. If you go to YouTube and you type in if you type in AP or advanced placement or College Board, you can go to this website. And then under their playlist, they have oh, I didn't want that one. Oh, maybe if I would have went down to So they have AP Environmental Science, and this is actually really good. I haven't watched all the videos. I watched like the first 3 that they uploaded, um, and they're pretty good. So if you don't want to sit through my lectures, because we all know that every single person that watches my lectures pays attention. But if you wanted to, you could go through and watch these. It was held on Zoom, so the quality's not going to be great. It's not 1080, but the videos aren't too bad. And so if you want to, you can watch these. You'll get basically the same information. So going through, kind of continuing where we were last time with matter cycles. This is one of the things that I wanted to hit on the most. We covered this a little bit in bio, but we didn't really don't hit on it a whole lot. Like, we go through kind of the basics of it. And this is where the chemistry of environmental science comes into play. So we have the carbon cycle. This is how carbon moves through the atmosphere, or moves through an ecosystem. So it begins with the intake of CO2 during photosynthesis. Carbon atoms are incorporated into glucose, and then they remain in plant material until death. But that's not the only place it can end up. It can be eaten by a predator. So if you enjoyed a salad for breakfast, I don't know why, but let's say you enjoy a salad for breakfast, then you would have taken in that carbon that has been incorporated into that plant through photosynthesis. Respiration, so you release your carbon dioxide through respiration. Excretion, so how you relieve waste from your body. And incorporation, so incorporation is where you actually take that carbon in and incorporate it into your tissues, and it's what makes up 90% of your body is mostly carbon. Well, I mean water, but as far as like a lot of the core molecules, they have carbon at the very center of them. Looking at DNA and RNA, proteins, basically the 4 biological molecules, they have carbon at the core of them, especially sugars and lipids. Those are just chains and chains of carbons. Or, once it's incorporated into you, how do you get that out? Well, you end up, like most animals, they end up passing away or dying, and then decomposers or organisms that specifically consume dead and decaying material will get a hold of that. So the most common one that everyone thinks of is fungus. Fungus is a decomposer. It eats on dead material. The trees out in front of the high school, remember how I said that some of them were dead? You actually look up, not right now, but when the weather starts to get a little bit nicer, if you look most of the way up from the plant, you will see, or most way up from the tree, you'll see mushrooms growing out of the side of it. And those are the reproductive parts of a fungus. Why are there reproductive parts of a fungus hanging out of the side of the tree? Well, look at the tree. There's no leaves on it. That tree is dead, and it's standing right there. And the fungus is on the inside of it, consuming the inner core of that tree. So looking at the carbon cycle, when you look at one of these charts as far as cycling, pick a place to start at and then go from there. All right. So the easiest place to start is with CO2 in the atmosphere. There's a small amount of methane and carbon monoxide, but for the most part, the bulk of carbon that's going to be in the atmosphere is going to be in the form of CO2. So then photosynthesis, we bring that in to plants. So trees bring that up. Now, we know that not every plant is eaten. This tree right here might not be eaten, but let's say it falls over and then it's exposed to a fire. Then that burning of forest fuel wood and organic debris, that will release it back into the atmosphere. So remember your sink and source, sink being where it ends up at, a source being where it comes from. So you have this carbon that is being liberated out through heat, and the fire is producing, or the smoke from the fire is producing carbon dioxide, which ends up back into the atmosphere. And again, where's that going to end up? Well, it can end up back into the plants, or it can end up in the water in the form of CO2. And then from there, other photosynthetic aquatic organisms, so phytoplankton, can bring that in and incorporate that into their tissues, which then zooplankton eat. And the aquatic food chain is extremely complex. It's very, very difficult. And then over time, a lot of the stuff dies and ends up kind of settling down to the bottom. And over time, it eventually makes its way into organic sediments. When we talked about soil layers, the O layer, the organic layer, is the highest part. But you have to think that all of the soil layers kind of combined down from there to an extent. There are some that aren't, but most of those top soil layers are going to be dead or decayed organic matter, at least in the case of where there hasn't been primary succession taking. Excuse me. And some of that will end up as fossil fuels, oil and gas. Why do we call it fossil fuels? Because these organisms end up as fossils, and then as they break down, they end up becoming oils and gases. Natural gas that we get from fracking is a form of fossil fuel. Coal, at the same time, is a form of fossil fuel. And we end up pulling this stuff out of the environment, and we can use this in different things. It shows an oil pump right here, and then I assume this is supposed to be industry. And then we also have cars, right? So we heat our houses. Like my house runs off of natural gas. My car runs off of gasoline. I don't own an electric car yet. And so a lot of these points are where those fuels will end up at. And even if I did have an electric car, there's still fossil fuels used, because here in Indiana, the number one place we get electricity is through coal. And so that coal will end up being used to produce electricity, which will then go into an electric car that you drive around in. It doesn't in this include animals, but you know that like a bird comes in and eats berries off of this tree, and then the bird lands on the ground and a snake takes it out, and then a hawk takes that out, and then it dies and a fungus gets a hold of it. So there is that that part of it. So into the nitrogen cycle. Nitrogen's uptake inorganic nitrogen from the environment and build protein molecules, which are later eaten by consumers. Nitrogen fixing bacteria change nitrogen to less mobile, more useful forms by combining it with hydrogen to make ammonia, which is used to build amino acids. So amine groups are nitrogen heavy groups. Plants do not directly get their nitrogen from the atmosphere. They get it indirectly from the atmosphere using some sort of nitrogen fixing organism. Legumes, for instance, we always say legumes make their own nitrogen, but really they have nodules on their roots which fix the nitrogen for them and allow them to take that up. We do not get our nitrogen from the atmosphere. The nitrogen we breathe out, theoretically, breathe in, we theoretically breathe out. And so it should be an even amount. But we get our nitrogen through food. So members of the family legume have nitrogen fixing bacteria that live in their root tissues. They're called nodules. So if you pull up a bean and it looks like these they look like galls, but instead of being on the stem itself, it's on the roots. Those nodes contain nitrogen fixing bacteria, which bring in N2 and convert that over to ammonia for the plant to use. So nitrogen re-enters the environment through the death of organisms, through excrement and urinary waste. The reason that we pee is to release nitrogen waste. Nitrogen re-enters the atmosphere when denitrifying bacteria breaks down nitrates into N2 or nitrous oxides. So denitrifying bacteria, or denitrification, is the process of converting an organic or a usable form of nitrogen by organisms into nitrous oxides and diatomic nitrogen gas. Humans have profoundly altered the nitrogen cycle by using synthetic fertilizers, nitrogen fixing crops, and burning fossil fuels. Remember that when we remove oil from the ground, it's not just carbon or carbon and hydrogen. It also contains other things in it. We used to always have this debate, which is more dangerous for the environment, crude oil or refined oil, because crude oil contains a bunch of extra stuff in it. Like it contains mercury and a lot of heavy metals and other toxicants, but it doesn't last in the environment all that long. Once it's in the environment, it's gone pretty quickly. But if you look at refined oil, it doesn't have as much of that stuff, but it does linger in the environment a lot longer. So there is kind of this whole trade-off. You know, it's like, take into example like what we're going through right now with COVID-19. COVID-19 is very slow acting. It is killing a lot of people, but compare that to, let's say, an earthquake, where an earthquake does pretty much the same thing, but it's very rapid, right? It happens within minutes and it's over with, compared to disease or flooding or something like that, where it happens over a long period of time. So looking at the nitrogen cycle is a lot more complex. All right, this is extremely complex. So again, start with a place. We're going to start with nitrogen in the atmosphere. This nitrogen fixing bacteria in soil and roots make ammonia, and then nitrite bacteria can make nitrites, and nitrate bacteria can make nitrates. So notice the difference here: nitrite with an I or nitrate with an A. Nitrate with an A is NO3 minus compared to NO2 minus with, nitrites. Then from there, denitrifying bacteria and send that up into the atmosphere, or go through amino acid synthesis in plants. Now from those plants, death, so the plants die and decompose, decay bacteria gets a hold of it and ends up back into the ground. Or in this animal can do the same thing. It can either die or it can give off waste, which ends up back in the soil. So heading back up into the atmosphere, a really common form that is thought the first organic-ish or usable organic forms of nitrogen started was from lightning. Lightning is thought to have provided the catalyst to synthesize a lot of early molecules for life. So lightning happens, and that will produce a nitrate. There's also some NH3 that is produced through volcanic activity. And then notice a source where nothing really enters through it, and it's here with this farmer. And again, this isn't like a slight against farmers, but a lot of farmers use synthetic fertilizers because they cost less. And so some of that ends up as runoff, where you end up with eutrophication and sedimentation. Eutrophication is the process of adding extra nutrients into an environment that causes an exponential growth of organisms. Algal blooms that you see in the Gulf of Mexico tend to result quite a bit from having excess runoff from the Mississippi River draining into the Gulf of Mexico and dragging a lot of those chemicals with it. And then there's sedimentation too, where some of it ends up in there and just settles down. And then, of course, nitrous oxides from transportation and industry. You have to get this stuff there. And then, of course, cars and industry produces this, and you end up with nitrogen oxides in the atmosphere. The nitrogen cycle is definitely a lot more complex than the carbon cycle. So the phosphorus cycle, this one is overlooked quite a bit because it's relatively simple, but this tends to be the limiting factor. There was a study that was done on a lake in Wisconsin. It was done in one of the northern states. Maybe it was in Canada. It's been a while since I've looked at the study, but with that, what the guy ended up finding out with looking through this study was that that when he ended up putting fertilizers, or when he ended up putting chemicals into the water, he ended up putting nitrogen in one side and nitrogen and phosphorus in the other side, and found out that he ended up with larger algal formations where there was nitrogen and phosphorus, meaning that out of those chemical reactions, phosphorus was definitely the limiting factor in that. So phosphorus compounds are leached from rocks and minerals and usually transported in taken in and incorporated by producers being plants or phytoplankton. And then it's passed on to consumers from there. How do we get our phosphorus? it like everything else does. And then it's returned to the environment by decomposition. So you can see that this process is really, really slow. So with this, the major sink or major source for this is phosphate rocks. So through mining, we can extract this out, and then you have runoff and leaching, which ends up getting dissolved in the waterways, into plants, then plant and animal waste, or into the animal, and then animal waste. And that can end up settling down and become deep ocean sediment. There's also geological uplift where some of this is brought back up. Then you have, through phosphate rocks, some weathering can happen. You can end up with phosphate in the soils. That ends up getting into plants, which then ends up getting into this animal. Oh, I didn't even see this fish. If he gets unlucky enough and swims up near the surface and a hawk comes along and just takes him out, and instantly now this aqueous form has now ended up into a terrestrial form when he eats this fish. And then, of course, birds do their business. And so you have animal waste. There's also plant waste, too, where plants decompose and seeds drop. And right now I have a tree in my backyard and the flower petals are starting to drop off of it. And those end up on the ground, and then decomposers come along and do their thing. So you could see that there's the cycling of this is a little bit different. It's also a lot slower. This process, weathering, is not one of those things that takes place over 20 minutes. It's a very slow, long cycle. And this can actually be tracked, and there are studies that have been done that show how phosphorus cycles kind of move. It's like the solar cycle. The solar goes in these 11-year cycles. Phosphorus goes in cycles, but they're a lot longer than 11 years. The sulfur cycle, this isn't a real common one, and it's not really talked about a lot, but sulfur does play a major impact into the environment. Most of it's tied up in underground rocks and minerals. Inorganic sulfur released into the air by weathering and volcanic eruptions. The reason we talk about this is because there are some organisms that use sulfur as their form of energy rather than using carbon. And so the cycle is complicated by a large number of oxidation states that the elements assume. Human activities release a large amount of sulfur, primarily through burning fossil fuels. When I was in the Navy, we were trained quite a bit on how to detect sulfurs by the smell. And if we smelled it, what we should do to react to that, because it could be dangerous. And while I had a limited amount of time on a ship, I spent most of my time on land. It was one of those things that was emphasized quite a bit. When I earned my surface warfare qualification during a deployment, one of the big things that they had talked about when you have to get your damage control, certification, is what do you do for H2S and things like that. It's important in rainfall acidity, and usually whenever you test rainfall acidity, a lot of it can either come from sulfurs or it comes from carbon. So kind of wrap this up. I know this went pretty quick, but I wanted to, because I know that there's another teacher that does a lesson right after mine. So I wanted to move over to Google Meets to answer questions really quick. If you guys had any, because I know you guys probably have 1,000 questions about the AP exam, and we'll move over and do that. So we went over some basic definitions of what matter is. Organic compounds, we talked about those, and how do you take organic compounds and turn it into cells? How energy is made from those compounds. Using law of thermodynamics, how nothing can be created or destroyed, it can only change, and how we change energy from the sun into thermal energy and light energy into chemical energy that we can use through photosynthesis, and then how we give that off in respiration. Talked about some ecosystems. And the big one with this is food chain. Remember the law of 10%. If you have 100 kilojoules of electricity in plants, your primary consumers, the organisms that eat only plants, those you lose 10%. So they only have, or should have, about 10 kilojoules of energy. And the other thing with that, remember that not many things are far removed from plants. Even if you look at us, like if you, let's say the only thing that you eat is hamburgers, that's plants, cows, us. So you're not too far removed from plants. It's rare that you end up with a lot of steps. We talked about ecological pyramids. You have the bottom producers, and then above that you have primary consumers, secondary consumers, and that keeps going until you hit apex predators. And then the last thing we covered today was matter cycles. Matter cycles being carbon, nitrogen, phosphorus, and then a little bit of sulfur cycling. The last one that we did not talk about was water cycling, but we did talk about that previously in class. We will talk about that later. And there's a picture of some trees and some mountains. So one of the things that I plan on trying to do is I want to get or I'd like to review quite a few things, but at the same time we're going to have to move forward a little bit and kind of burn through some of this stuff. I was going to do lectures just one day a week for each of the classes, but I realized that's not going to be enough. So I'm going to end up live streaming on Tuesdays, Thursdays for AP. Now, if someone wants another lesson done, we could talk about it in Google Meets and I can incorporate that on Wednesday. And again, all of these will end up on YouTube. That being said, it took me 2 or 3 minutes to go live this morning because I kept getting errors every single time and it said live streaming not available. There's a lot of people at home, a lot of people on the internet. That's why if you use Hulu or Netflix or whatever, that it's got buffering and login times and all this other stuff. There's a lot of people at home trying to shelter in place, basically. So if you or these videos should end up as VODs, videos on demand, on YouTube afterwards. If they don't, the PowerPoints are still on PowerSchool. Make sure that you're telling everybody to check PowerSchool every few days, especially now we're done with spring break. We're pushing until the end of the semester. We don't have much time left. I'm not sure what it's going to look like after the AP exam. I'll think of something. I guess we'll go through some like case studies or talk about different things like that. So I'm unsure about how any of that stuff's going to happen. In case you didn't hear, we are out for the rest of the year. We're trying to make the best of this. If it seems, a lot of it is that if it seems like we don't know what we're doing, it's because this is the first time most of us have ever encountered this. I've never taught an online class. I've never taken an online class. So I am learning this as I go. I am asking professors that I know that, what are you guys doing for online classes? If you guys have any ideas of what you want or what you want to see, let me know. You guys have my email. Make sure that you're checking PowerSchool every few days. Make sure that you're telling people who you know aren't watching this or won't watch this to check PowerSchool because I'll post all the information onto there. But other than that, those transitions. Other than that, I will be moving over to Google Meets. I will post the link on PowerSchool in a few minutes. I'm going to run and use the restroom after I end the stream. But that's all I had for today. Thank you for watching.